truck door was a man. Hey, welcome back to my 1972 Datsun 510. Today we're going to work on the trunk, cutting out the old portion here, welding in the new portion here, and then getting all of this sort of tacked together. So that way we can then move to sinking the battery box in and finishing out this section so we can then put on the fender. Let's get to it. So in a little closer detail, you'll see that I've got some pretty crappy welds from whenever I welded this piece in first. This was the very first rust repair panel that I had ever tried to do. So I will likely take this piece out. I will take this piece out. You can see the rust here. And I will then tie it into this piece using an underlay here, as well as back around this corner right here. But that's what we're going to go ahead and work on. Again, getting rid of this rust and getting rid of this rust. You can actually see that there's a daylight through here. If you look close, look closer, closer, too close. Back up a little bit. Got it right there. Yeah, see that? So nice. Anywho, let's get to it. Here's the welds that were done yesterday, or the last video, excuse me. Not super great, but definitely stronger than it was. And this panel's always going to be flimsy. So, yay old Datsuns. I start by forming the new piece of the rear panel. I do this by using a inner fender that I've cut off from the new pieces. That gives me the nice rounded piece that I can then form using the hammer and dolly. Well, I am pleasantly surprised with how that turned out. Here's the piece that I'm going to be replacing, laid up against this other piece. You can see that it's got a fairly similar curve to it. And I'll have to sort of cut, but it'll fit into that spot right there. Like so. Haven't decided, like, that's probably the better way to do it. Let's see what it looks like this. Looks like it still needs maybe a little bit more bending here. But I just used a right angle piece. That way I could sort of tap and just can sort of add that curve, just little taps at a time, and then just constantly checking it against where I'm going to place it. So I think, like I said, I think that turned out really well. So now we will go back, sort of finish that out. We'll cut out the old piece and put in the new piece. Now that I think I have the piece pretty much the way I want it, I go ahead and cut out the old piece after marking out the spot with a marker. I do this very slowly because I want this piece to fit really well. And so you'll see me use the marker, and then I go ahead and cut out, and then I slowly shape this piece to the way it needs to be by using the angle grinder and just taking off little pieces of metal at a time. I probably could have gone a little faster, but again, haste makes waste in this kind of situation, and I wanted the piece to fit really well. I even went ahead and used some sandpaper that I had just in long strips to try to just buy myself a little bit of extra space without actually taking off too much of the metal from the back panel. So I have taken little pieces off by little pieces off, and I have got what I think to be is one of the better patch panels I've made. So it just sort of sits in like that, and really fits the space really well. Very, very minor gaps all around. And I'll be able to tack here and then get that tiny little bit of tapping going on just to match up these panels better as I move forward. But that is, in my opinion, a very good patch panel, and I'm very happy with the way it turned out. I let's just hope that this car and the old metal doesn't just like give up the ghost as I'm welding into it. But so this panel's made, or piece is made. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut out this panel and get a new panel set up for right here. So let's get to that. I start by sinking the battery box to where I believe it's going to go and moving it backwards and forwards, really to get the nice fitment. Once I do that, I trace out the outside measurements and then go ahead and massage where it's going to be on the drop panel itself. Whenever I massage that, it allows the battery box to drop as low as possible, but I don't want it to be so low that it drops below where the drop panel will actually cause issues there. So once I do that, I go ahead and test fit the battery box a couple more times just to make sure everything's right. And then I go ahead and start making the cuts on the trunk panel itself. And you'll see me sort of move out. I didn't do a very good job whenever I was getting the camera angle here, so apologize about that. But I'm just using the angle grinder to go in and sort of clean up the cuts. And then I use a piece of paper to start creating a template for the floor that will also secure to the battery box using a dirty finger, and then go ahead and finalize the tracing with a pencil just on paper. Then I'll cut it out. I've got a nice little template here that's going to go flush weld here, and then I'm going to cut the holes, or punch the holes here so I can plug weld it on this side, and then shape it around this edge here. So my camera overheated and videoed nothing, so I'll go ahead and give you the voiceover. Pretty much what I'm going to do in this part, you'll see me take the old portion of the floorboard that I didn't use and actually turn that into the rear panel. I took a little spot that has a dimple in it to allow me to get maybe a little bit more structure inside of the trunk panel, but once I've figured out sort of how that piece is going to look, I go ahead and trace it onto the old floorboard and then move it into place, slowly moving it up and down just to make for sure that it fits into the slot really well. Again, I really want tight fitment here, as I don't want a whole bunch of excess space. So there's a lot of small cuts and then just checking to make for sure that everything is just right as I go ahead and put it in the car. Another thing I really had to check on or make sure to do was get the curve along the back panel correct, and then I punch my holes in the drop panel. Alright, so I moved you far away just because I was going to be moving back and forth, but as you can see, this panel slides in right here. I got to do a little bit more panel beating in order to get it lined up perfectly, but that gets me very close, and so I'll tack it here, and I'll tack it here, and then I will use the hammer and dolly to sort of bring down this edge just a little bit, and then bring in this flush with the back end of the car. But all in all, I'm pretty ecstatic about how that turned out. Definitely not a bad, and I mean, just a little bit of pressure puts it into the spot that it needs to be. So we're going to have that put in there. This little bit of a ridge from the floorboard, I believe, will make it a little bit stronger in this area, less chance of warping as we put pressure on it. But yeah, that is what she is looking like right now. Once I get that flattened out at this corner into the back of the car, I think it'll be muy bueno. So I gotta let this weld through primer dry. Sorry, before I run off, look at this. This is the remnants of my first welds with the old welder. Just look at all these, like, just flyaways. I don't know what you call these things. Like, we're just, oh man, it's so bad. Hey, you gotta learn somewhere, right? Don't be afraid to get in there and try. But whew, man, can you imagine if you bought this car and saw this kind of stuff a couple years later? Whew, not good. The very next day. Oh, hello. I see you up there. Let's go ahead and put this piece in, and put this piece in. We're gonna clamp this piece in right over here, start the welds here, work our way to the back of the car, and then put in the back panel piece. I've got the welder, gotta fire it up, and we'll get to it. GoPro, stop recording. So you see in this first part that I've got this white spot painted along the inner frame. And I've actually bent that piece down in order to allow myself some more space to push the battery box inward on the car. I've bent that down so I can slide the battery box in, and then I'll weld it to that. But as you see, I'm just slowly moving around this new piece, tacking and then tapping, making for sure that I get the piece flush with the old piece. Once I get it flush, I then go ahead and put a quick tack. I've tried very hard to keep the heat out of this panel at first, but then get a little overzealous, as you'll see in the next still. You can actually see the heat warp or the heat rings move out from the welds as you look at these pieces. Again, move slowly so that way you don't have to deal with this like I did later. I am happy with how this turned out, and the temperature settings on the welder seem to do a good job of not burning through the old metal and really getting good joins throughout. Here I'm just using the 4.5-inch angle grinder wheel to lower my welds throughout this whole portion, so that way it looks a little smoother and more flush inside of the trunk. Alright, so this panel's in. I did a fairly good job at the beginning of keeping heat out of it. However, I got carried away, and you can see this nice heat distortion here. It's not the end of the world. I'm going to bend it up anyway and tack weld it or weld it to the battery box, but that's going to take some hammering in order to get to where it needs to go. My helmet kept the sensor is not picking up the bead right away, and so like I'm getting these little like spot like blindness. It's like so frustrating. So but this panel's in. It's definitely not rusted and stronger than what it was. Now I just got to get this piece in, and then we can keep on trucking. But so let's go ahead and get this piece in. Finally, I put in this last little piece on the back panel. Again, following the same method, I tap very lightly with a hammer to get it in place right where there's flush. And I'm actually using my hand a lot to feel along the ridge just to see how smooth it is and how close these pieces are. I want to get them really close so that way there's less air gap between the two. Once I get them to where I like it, I go ahead and throw a little tack on there, and then I go ahead and weld in between the two just to ensure that they're sealed up. I don't think anything I could say would be considered a pro tip, but pro tip, use a flashlight to illuminate your workspace. It makes it so much easier to start your welds whenever you have these small gaps like this. Oh look, it's welded. Sorry. Look, it's welded. It's not the world's prettiest welds, but they're nice and solid, and they get the job done, and it's probably stronger than this piece up here. I'll have to go back through, and I'm actually probably not going to grind down this side. I'm just going to leave them exactly as is, sort of provide some structure there. Now let's check out this back panel. What do you think? Should we leave the scars of soot on the back of the car? Sort of show off that I don't know how to weld, or I don't care about my paint job, I guess. Let me know what you think. It's definitely there. It's definitely, I think it'll look good once I sand it and clean it. Well, that concludes this portion. Next part we got to do is clean up the surface here, clean up some surfaces here, and then create the piece that's going to go in there, and then we'll tie it to the battery box whenever we do that. So we'll get to that in the next video. If you like what you see, go ahead, comment, like, subscribe, or don't. It's all makes no difference to me. You'll see on the left, right. Actually, it does make a difference to me. I would appreciate it if you subscribed and you followed my build. But YouTube will show you the videos around me of what they think that you might like to see based on watching this video. If you got any suggestions for things that you'd like to see me do differently, go ahead and comment. But as always, thank you for showing up to the channel, and hope you have a great day. God bless.